Hello, everybody. Okay, right. Early research methods, right? I'm not going to lie to you. I have already filmed this twice, and both times I've accidentally deleted the video. So I am struggling to care about hypotheses at this point, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. But you don't care, and you're really excited to actually learn about hypotheses, hence the reason you're here. So when we're talking about hypotheses, we're talking about essentially a prediction that's based on previous research and or theory, right? So what it isn't is a guess. So at the beginning of a piece of research, a researcher will come up with a hypothesis that he or she or they think is going to happen based on previous research. So they are not guesses, right? They are based on previous research. And I'm not going to go through the if-then hypotheses just now, but you do need to the different types of hypotheses. So, yeah, right. We know that a hypothesis is a prediction based on previous research, data, or theories. Fine, but what we don't know are the different types. So the two types you need to know are an alternate hypothesis, also known as an alternative hypothesis, but also null hypotheses as well. Now, the alternate hypothesis can be split down into one-tailed or two-tailed, and it's worth noting down, that one-tailed hypotheses are known as directional hypotheses, whereas two-tailed hypotheses are known as non-directional hypotheses. The null hypothesis you don't actually need to know, but it's worth teaching you anyway, to be perfectly honest with you. So what do we mean by an alternative hypothesis or an alternate hypothesis? As you can see on the right-hand side, we've got your two IVs. And in this case, your IV is music, and you want to see if music affects time in completing the crosswords, as you can see. Fine. It's pretty straightforward so far. I'm going to split my two IVs into two different conditions. So in one group, they're listening to AC/DC, and in the other group, they're listening to Drake. Fine. One's rock, one is rap, if you will. My two DVs, or my DV, remember DVs are always numerical. I'm going to measure the time in completing crossword, and in brackets in seconds, and it's that in seconds that makes it numerical, by the way. So you have to make sure you include that. My alternate hypothesis would be that there is going to be a difference. There is going to be a difference between AC/DC and Drake. Now, to make it a little bit easier, I guess, or not really, I'll read this out, but an alternate hypothesis is one that actually predicts a difference will be made in the DVs. So basically, another way to write this down, and the way I would recommend you write this down, is that an alternative hypothesis predicts that the IV will impact the DV. I'll say that again, even though it's a video. An alternate hypothesis suggests that the IV will actually have an impact on the DV. Now, it is split, as it says, into two types. On the one hand, you've got directional. On the other hand, you've got non-directional. What we mean by directional hypotheses is not only are you sure that the IV is going to affect the DV, you're so confident that you even know what direction the IV is going to affect the DV. So if we go back here, for example, I want you to imagine, just theoretically, that I have got previous research that suggests that listening to rock improves cognitive functioning. All right. There's previous evidence or theories or whatever, results or research. There's previous findings that show that listening to rock, as in this case AC/DC, has an impact on cognitive functioning. Now, if I know that from previous pieces of research, when it comes to me making a hypothesis, not only am I going to be sure that music does impact crosswords, I know which direction it's going to go. In this case, I know that AC/DC is going to score higher. So that is why you make a directional or one-tailed hypothesis, is if you base it off previous research and you have a good idea which direction that change will take place. A non-directional hypothesis is generally done when you think there will be a change, but you're not entirely sure which direction that's going to go. So, for example, if there hasn't been enough research into what it is you are looking at, you know the IV is going to affect the DV. You know the IV is going to affect the DV, but you are not confident to know which way the IV will affect the DV, and that's why you do a non-directional one. Now, I'm going to give you some examples later on, but the key thing to take away here is that directional hypotheses have words like increase or decrease or, move up or reduce or improve or deprove or what. They have words that actually state a direction. Increase, for example, suggests something's going up. And again, write all this down, please. Non-directional hypotheses suggest they have words like affect, influence, manipulate, difference. Something is going to happen. The IV is going to manipulate. The IV is going to affect the DV. I just don't know which direction it's going to go. So you can figure out whether it's non-directional or directional based on the words that you use. So a good example of an alternative hypothesis here is working in groups will increase confidence scores. That word there, increase confidence scores, that is what gives it away that this is a directional hypothesis. Because not only are you saying that what are we looking at here? Working in groups will increase confidence scores when given a presentation more so than working independently. So your two IVs here are working in groups and working independently. So we know that, let's call that work setting. That IV is work setting. We know that work setting impacts confidence scores. Work impact improves confidence scores. We know that, right? And thus we can actually say it's going to increase confidence scores. Well, this is true, but it feels a bit personal. If Kieran eats the entire Millionaire shortbread tub, which I will, by the way, because they're amazing, he will put on more weight than if he were not to eat the entire tub. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. Firstly, that clearly is directional because it's stating a direction. I'm going to get more bigger. But the thing you have to know about all hypotheses, and please note this down, a good hypothesis will have both IVs and the DVM. One sentence has both the IVs and the DVs. If you have a look here, you've got working in groups, that is one IV, but you've also got working independently, that is another IV, for example. Plus you've got the DV just there. If you look here, if we look down here, sleeping 8 hours, IV number 1, will cause reaction times to be faster, that's the DV, when compared to 5 hours sleep, IV2. So you need to be able to actually note this. Now, a non-directional one it's exactly the same ones. There will be a difference in confidence scores. Kieran's weight will be affected by the beautiful Battenberg cake, also banging cake, by the way. There will be a difference in reaction times. Non-directional, again, is made when you are less confident of what way the change is going to happen. Now, the one thing to point out here is everything I've talked about so far are what we call experimental hypotheses, right? They are talking about a hypothesis to do with an experiment, not a correlation. And so you are going to essentially be having to write the word difference. Please write down again that if you're doing a hypothesis for an experiment, if you're doing a hypothesis for an experiment and you want to do a non-directional one, you have to say difference. You have to say the word difference because you're looking for a difference between the DVs and there are no DVs in correlations. Now, some of you may not know what correlations are. Maybe you didn't do it at GCSE. Maybe you haven't looked at it yet in first year. But we will look at it in time. But just please note down that for experimental hypotheses, you have to use the word difference when referring to non-directional hypotheses. Now, I did say you don't need to know this. I am going to go through this, right? No. There's no difference, basically, right? So null hypothesis is a hypothesis where you actually say there will be no difference. The IV will not affect the DV. There will be no difference between the DVs, for example. So null is dull, basically. It's quite a boring hypothesis. It says that nothing is going to actually change. And the null hypothesis predicts that the IV will have absolutely no effect upon the DV. And so when you actually, there's the slightly pointless bit, I guess, but when you do a piece of research, researchers actually make an alternate hypothesis where they say the IV will affect the DV, and then they make a contradictory null hypothesis which says it won't affect the DV. So you're making contradictory hypotheses. But the idea is, what happens, you get your research, you look at your research, and then you look, okay, well, I can accept the alternate hypothesis and I can reject the null hypothesis. So that's why you make both, because eventually you accept one and then reject the other. And you have to state that in your piece of research. Okay, so if I were just to show you this one just here, diabetics will be more health conscious than other people. That is directional because of this word just here. If I look at this one, extroverts and introverts will differ. Okay, well, that's non-directional because differ is it's a non-point, really. You're not saying it's a non-directional point. Levels of job satisfaction will be influenced by your salary. You're saying that the IV is going to affect the DV, but we don't know which way. It's going to say it's influenced. Influence could be up or down. So that's non-directional because it's not actually stating a direction. People with high self-esteem will be more sociable than people. We can be conditioned to respond to sound more quickly. Directional. Psychiatric patients are more likely. Directional, straight away. People are more directional. Don't even need to look at that. Athletes will perform better. Directional. So a lot of these are actually directional. Men are worse. That is directional. Worse is stating a direction, isn't it? So you get very, very good at being able to pick out non-directional and directional hypotheses. But the main thing I want you to walk away with is actually how you write the hypotheses. In your hypotheses, which should be one sentence, you need reference to both IVs and the DV, specifically how the DV is being measured. In seconds, in bananas, in astronauts. How are you actually measuring the astronauts? That was a weird one. How are you actually measuring the DV? That is everything. There's a couple of other examples here, but that is everything for hypotheses. It's relatively straightforward, but remember, these are only for experimental hypotheses, not correlational hypotheses. They come later in the year.